gave us the heads up earlier that it's being recorded. So I'm used to waiting for that, for the voice that's like, recording in progress. So anyway.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I see the little red dot.
Look at me already being thrown off in the beginning. So. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Broken Brain. It's me, Dwight, your host for today's intersection with psychology and culture and doing good in the neighborhood. I was going to say that's a rhyme, but basically doing good in the world, as we're talking about a nonprofit organization, the Because organization, that works with helping survivors of human trafficking and in many, many very important ways, and we're going to get into those ways. My guest is Marcia Holt, who is the founder and CEO of this organization. And another perk and plus for your organization is that you're headquartered in Philadelphia, which I grew up in Harrisburg. So that's, you know, the old country for me, as I call it, back where I grew up in Pennsylvania. So that's also a plus for, I'm sure everybody out there feels the same way as I say that. So anyway, Marcia, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I became aware of your organization through a contact. Somebody had reached out to talk about just an episode of the podcast and also an event that you guys are doing. Maybe we want to hit that. It's currently ongoing, right? You're doing an online event.
We're doing Autumn's Challenge for Change, which is funding, hopefully capital building for a safe house here in Delaware County.
Awesome.
So right now it's a virtual event where participants can answer trivia questions, have fun with taking fall leave pictures, and supporting a great cause.
Very good. And it's as we are recording on it's the 22nd, so it's gone on a couple more days. I'm going to put this up so people can check that out tomorrow, and then they can also, we'll get into how they can track what you guys are doing to the end. So, but would you mind starting out by telling people a little bit about yourself and how did you get into this kind of work?
Right. So I got into this kind of work through my graduate studies. I studied human trafficking, and marriage brokerage as an aspect of organized crime. And through that, I decided to do, instead of a midterm to get out of it, work with my graduate professor and cataloging some interviews of victims of crimes against humanity. And through that, I was wondering, what was the story afterwards? What happened to these victims afterwards? Services were available. And more times than not, there were limited resources, and the stories had sadder endings than we would hope. Mm-hmm. And diving into that, I became more interested into the social working side of it rather than the law.
Well, yeah, it's a very, very big issue. And this is something I've read a lot about and been very aware of some of those efforts. And I'm going to say the real effective efforts. I'm going to mention a little bit about that because I think that there's a lot of people who have certainly a misinterpretation of the problem, but there's lots, and we've seen in the news like some controversy around organizations that essentially do what people look at and say, oh, they're fighting human trafficking. And in fact, even if they are doing something effective, which as we've discovered, some are very much not, the aftercare is always a criticism of those efforts of like, sure, it's one thing to try to rescue. And I say it that way because unfortunately some organizations essentially were just kind of high cost versions of, I'm going to say, cosplaying superheroes, basically. People going in and cosplaying as commandos and undercover work supposedly that basically led to worsening the problem in some cases, but definitely the aftercare was completely absent.
Correct. Yes, we are not anyone's superhero, their savior. That is left to law enforcement and professionals who can go into these dangerous situations. We focus on the gap afterwards. After they escape their trafficking situation, what now? Are they being booked for prostitution and it's a human trafficking case? Can we connect them with legal aid? Do they need housing? What can they do now, basically? Yes. And help them find a way to recover and reclaim the life that they lost due to their trafficking.
Yeah, and that's the part that people don't often understand is that the before efforts is actually bolstering local economies and going in and doing social work in the areas where it's happening and with people to try to be preventative. And then the aftercare, and it sounds like you're talking about kind of like proactive. I mean, everything's reactive in a sense to the problem's existence, but that you guys are trying to seek out the issues, right? And define them, because no, you're probably not getting all of them, someone coming and telling you or whatever. You probably are having to find some of those issues, right? In those situations, I should say.
Right. So we do awareness efforts, of course, as part of our anti-human trafficking efforts. And sometimes we're contacted by other case managers that have a client that is suspected of human trafficking, which we can help find services to them that are tailored towards that specific trauma of human trafficking.
Sure.
And other times they may hear us through a podcast or a website and be able to approach us that way. It's more safe when they approach us, or if they have someone to go through to contact us.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
When you do come across, are the people that you serve usually complete like at that point out of it, or are they still in the kind of being extricated or leaving those situations?
So sometimes it's hard to decipher that. Sometimes it is a mix of domestic violence and human trafficking, in which is more difficult to leave, or especially if they have children. In which case, what we do is refer them to legal aid and help them find a way to escape that situation safely, since we are not the rescuers, as you said, we're not the saviors. We don't do that aspect of it, but we can support and provide resources. But yeah, basically, we leave that to law enforcement. And once they do leave their trafficking situation, or finally come to terms that they were trafficked, if they were confused about what exactly happened, we can help them navigate that.
Yeah. And perhaps, people may not be as aware of some of the ins and outs of that, what you just mentioned, which is not only does the public not always know what that means, but even a person who's being victimized may not recognize the labeling, I guess, or even just maybe the severity of what's going on, maybe to help to kind of give people a little bit of a definition of what kinds of things are we talking about that would qualify for that as that.
Right. Entering into forced acts of either labor, sexual, sex work. It could be anything of that. That's our main survivors come in with: labor trafficking and sex trafficking. Of course, there's other forms of trafficking, more extreme, organ and so forth. We obviously do not have survivors of that, because that's medical attention and quite severe case so far.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But
that would be a whole different range of services.
Exactly. But the sex and labor trafficking are the real big ones that come to us. And sometimes that doesn't appear like it is in the movies. They might think at the time that it's not a big deal, or that, it isn't as severe. But in, hindsight, they realize that they were forced to maybe sleep with these individuals to stay in their home, or they were forced to work without, their papers and for pittance, if anything.
Yeah.
I realized maybe that is trafficking. And that's why they're not fitting in. Yeah. And other support.
I gotcha. And there's got to be, that's a very specific type of trauma as well. I mean, trauma is something I work a lot with and we talk a lot about on the podcast. And I just wonder if you see just kind of, I don't know, it's a bit different forms of trauma, especially through the practical maybe experiences people have had. They're different than a lot of even sort of, I hate to say traditional, but traditional definitions of abuse and control. But yet from what you're talking about, there is quite a bit of crossover too.
It is quite complex, the trauma, because at first someone might go to a professional or another organization and say that they've been abused, or that they feel that they've been mistreated this way, that way, and not realize that it was human trafficking, because they're focusing so much on this and it seems like it fits but they're not understanding why they're not feeling a sense of belonging, or it's not quite getting at the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because it was human trafficking. It was against a real force.
I know one of the things that I see that's very difficult for people to deal with, and well, it can mask trauma and mask abuse, is people who are like, to some degree there was a, now forced, right? But they look at it and say there's a transactional nature. If you don't do this, I'm going to turn you in, you'll get deported.
Mhm.
If you don't do this, you're going to be homeless. You're going to be whatever. Addiction plays a role in that, I imagine, too, sometimes.
But we did, and there was recently an article in Philadelphia Gay News, especially with the LGBT community. Sometimes they can do threats of violence, which is, I will out you to your community, your family, which does keep them in the control of their trafficker. And many traffickers do try to control their victims by getting them addicted to drugs, becoming their dealer as well. That's further alienating them.
Right. And
Mhm.
I've also noticed, and the perpetrators of these things oftentimes will even play on this, to where there's the shame feeling of like, well, I'm doing this to get
Yeah,
something. I'm doing the air quotes here, get something that, and I've seen where people have been told that by abusers or perpetrators. That like, well, you're the one who's staying. You're the one, and if there's addiction and control and fear, you don't even have to be locked up anywhere. You could be sitting in a house or apartment somewhere,
exactly.
and like, I can't leave because once they notice I'm gone, my life is over, right? Maybe literally my life is over, or
Yeah,
figuratively.
exactly. And that's why it can be difficult to spot human trafficking, because it isn't someone always, handcuffed in a house or trapped in. It could be them walking around in a mall. It
Mm-hmm.
could be them going into a local pizzeria, because they have that mental control over them, that, their family might be harmed, or that something would happen to them, that they know that that individual will be coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So having people in different establishments becoming safe places, like our ally initiative, and having information out where maybe a victim who is out with their trafficker can discreetly, scan a QR code or put a pamphlet into their pocket, ask for help, is so important, because it might be masked as, just a boyfriend and girlfriend, when in cases it's human trafficking.
Yeah. No, that's a very interesting thing. Where do you see a lot of the people that you serve come from? Do we see just in and like international committee, refugee, immigrant people? Are there people who are just from local area too, or what's the range of population that you serve?
So for locations, since we do operate largely virtually, there's been in multiple different states, although mostly from city hubs like DC, Pennsylvania, or Philadelphia, sorry, and New York. So some in the suburbs who were, taken out of the city, or those that might have been done by family members as well. Unfortunately, that does happen.
Yeah. How common do you find that to be? I know with abuse cases with Child and Family Services, it's often, let's say, I don't have a percentage in front of me, but it's much more often somebody in the family or someone that knows the family.
Correct. Yeah. So normally with adolescents, um, what happens is that they are suspected of trafficking or abuse. And when we normally interact with adolescents is when they are about to become adults, where they're no longer going to be supported by the system.
I see.
So we help them transition and find services
Hmm.
for their trauma from that.
Yeah. So I know that when people talk about the risks of this kind of thing, right? They'll talk about like, oh, your kid turns a corner in the grocery store and they're just gone or something. And um, I'm curious about kind of the reality, because I think that our perception of those things gets into what do we watch for? Do I, and this is, I don't know. I'm not saying that doesn't happen or that we shouldn't be careful with our
Right.
kids or anything like that. Because I guess that, there's an area I'd like to educate myself a little bit in. I hear people make that a big focus. of awareness. But is that the main problem, or are we seeing it come from other, avenues and things?
Well, I don't have the statistics on that so much that I can't give you a, statistical answer. Yes, abductions happen, and then, of course, we have to be aware of our surroundings, which will help, and safety practices. What I've seen is a lot of online things, chats, dating apps, things like that, where you may meet up with someone that you don't know that's a stranger, or maybe even children talking in chat groups or Discord, things like that, to be aware of who um, your children are talking to
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
online. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because if you can sort of trick someone, or,
Mm-hmm.
and oftentimes people, it seems, are targeted who don't have like as strong of a family infrastructure. And it
Right.
kind of makes sense because you see things, I don't know, like I think of like the movie Taken or something like that,
Right.
to where it's like
Mm-hmm.
very dramatic and someone snatched right out of the public eye. And no, and it's one of those things. It's hard. I think education is difficult. Based off of conversations I have with people, let's say, um,
Right.
education. This is difficult because how do you say like, well, that's probably not happening that much, without it sounding like you're like excusing it or something,
Right.
or
Right.
like, well, I don't think this, or I mean, that's something we saw. Here I live in Utah, and we've had some scandals with some organizations, and they were organizations that were already being criticized by the anti-trafficking community and some of the legitimate organizations. And it was difficult to have conversations with people who would donate money, for example, and just say like, well, I've heard bad things. Oh, so you don't want to fight it, huh? And it gets into, you have these difficult conversations, like to say, oh, if someone grabs a kid in the grocery store in suburban U.S. neighborhood, the cops are going to show up pretty quick. And it's probably not I'm going to say best way. I mean, it's probably not the most effective way. And then we are turning a blind eye to things that are happening more frequently. Does this make sense? Maybe there's just a me thing.
No, 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 no. It is something that does happening, especially I know I put on control where saying this. Like King of Prussia Mall is really popular around me. And it's a
I've been
hub
there.
because you can go straight. Yeah, there you go.
It's huge.
You can go, yeah, and the highway is right there. You can go across state lines really quickly as well to New Jersey or elsewhere. And there's sometimes abductions there, even in the parking lot. So just be aware, and it does happen. Although, with technology and everything moving forward, it is becoming easier for the trafficker to do it through technology, or they might, have someone in on it, a victim of their own trafficking that is recruiting in these spaces. It could be just, public space that's really public, and that person is befriending or gaining trust to lure that person away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's exactly right. And I think the best thing is, it's always better to be adding awareness. Like it's like you say, here's a public area that does have that issue maybe more than others, and knowing that, but then also so we don't forget then to monitor kind of these things with tech and stuff. I mean, it sounds like some of the things that we might miss, especially if it's like a same age peer or someone, it reminds me of, I used to produce a podcast. It was the Rise Today inspirational podcast with Dr. Erica Harris. A little plug. It's still in reruns out there, sort of. We still replay it. But anyway, not to always be plugging it or whatever, just so people know, I guess. But we interviewed a survivor of some of the Canadian residential schools for Native and Indigenous peoples, where they were abducted and brought to these places. And one of the things that's a similarity, it reminds me of, as you're saying, is that the staff that were abusive there, or you could just say the staff, it's just how it was, but they would incentivize the older kids abusing the younger kids. And so then they had a whole nother sort of force of another level of abuse going on. And that also triggered the shame feeling of like, okay, I'm doing this too, or I've done this. But yet there was that was the system that was in place and institutionalized. So, yeah, to see those layers, and I guess I wonder about people coming out who have gotten into maybe if they were doing that. I mean, I'm sure you see survivors who were forced into those situations as well, who are trying to put their lives back together now.
Right. And as you're mentioning with that, it is tricky, especially even in the recovery process and going into some places that you think are safe, some shelters. Sometimes there are victims that are sent there specifically to recruit. So of
Oh
course
wow,
it's
that's I didn't
yeah,
think of that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Or they might still be in contact with their trafficker and they're like, oh, I'm talking to another survivor, and they're like, oh, let me meet them. So it is, of course, important to constantly be educating individuals on healthy relationships, as well as, it's great to start trusting individuals again, but, some salt or some caution is
yeah.
really important.
Yeah, that's a very difficult thing I think with trust issues is trying because you're not just trying to find trust and unfortunately you have a lot of people in your life, I mean sometimes even adoptive parents with youth or partners or friends that are like, "Well, you need to learn to trust. Come on, you need to learn to trust." And the reality is you're laying it out is yeah, I got to learn to trust, but like how to trust doesn't just mean trusting people. It's also finding the healthy boundaries of trust as well, and finding that
Exactly.
balance. Yeah.
Hmm.
And if you think about it, that's something that's good for any of us to learn. But these situations kind of force that issue to where there's such high, as you put it, literally high stakes practically, but also then emotionally, relationship wise, high stakes as well. That's a part of it I don't think people think about very much.
Right, right. And, that, impacts all forms of the relationship as well, how to trust an next employer, how to trust a friend, even a case manager, someone trying to help without going all in, but still, being able to form strong bonds and relationships that way.
Yeah. Do you well let's look at what's the kind of the myriad of things that you do work on or offer, cuz I mean it strikes me that somebody in a lot of these cases is having to rebuild everything and I should say build sometimes right from the ground up things they've never had. What all yeah, how do you guys approach that? What's the overall umbrella of the things you do?
So basically, the survivor is driving the entire time. So it's what they need, not what we think they need at the time. So what we do is we talk to them about a needs base. What do you need right now? And we can talk through it sometimes, especially if they're younger, but this is a need or a want. Um, so we try to help them exit survival mode as soon as possible, whether that is finding shelter, help them with getting documents or legal aid, referring them to that, helping them find groups to help them with life skills, or therapy, finding them counseling, helping them get set up with the state, or if they need some sort of assistance that way. Um, Basically, where they are at that time and point. That could be even career coaching or helping them find a mentor that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to work at a technical college as a counselor there, and we had a lot of people who were coming through. We had a lot of international students, for example, or people who we worked a lot with the domestic violence shelter locally as well. People that were looking for some programs that weren't necessarily going to be long, high cost. We were
Right.
state funded and those things, so it allowed us to have a lower cost control on tuition charges and worked with a lot of like in our state we had the Department of Labor funded some vocational rehabilitation and workforce services and imagine you must have to work pretty closely with those systems, right?
Yes, we try to partner up with those in their local area. Of course, one of the barriers to services is lack of funding or not having transportation. So there might be an organization that is in their state or in their, within an hour or two away, but if they don't have a car or money for a bus pass. We have to, find a different way, get a little creative of how they can receive those services. So yeah.
Yeah, that's got to be. What about what approaches do you find? And some of this might be so individualized that maybe you tell me if some of these questions are too individualized to answer. But when you do get into things like housing, for example, that's got to be, I don't know, I'm going to estimate a lot. I mean, it's going to be a pretty high percentage of people who that's an issue for. How do you approach that?
That's our greatest need, which is why we are capital building for a survivor safe house so that they can receive all these services in one place and not have to worry about transportation and not have to worry about going here or there.
Yeah.
It could just be almost a one-stop shop, which is what we're capital raising for now. But housing is a huge need because that helps you exit survival mode. You can't think of, finding a job. You can't think of all these things if you don't know where you're going to stay or you're going to be safe. So some of the issues that we find with that is just having beds available, these places, having shelters that specifically address human trafficking. So sometimes we can, find a survivor a place to stay at a DV shelter, which isn't human trafficking always, but it might be an aspect of it.
Yeah, and it strikes me that a lot of the dynamics are the same where as just a shelter that caters just for like food and shelter for the night, a great service and great part of the community, but they're not going to have some of those safeguards you mentioned of like anybody can leave with anybody, and anybody can come in and all that. Whereas I would say probably you find in a DV treatment and resource place, they know that dynamic because there's crossover, right?
Right, definitely. Some of these shelters, especially the ones that you have to show up every day to get a bed, can also make it hard for survivors to stay in contact with whatever organization is helping them because they have to go across the city by foot maybe to get in line to have a bed. Or that they might only be female serving, only female shelters when there might be a male survivor. Or they might be religious, and that might be a barrier for someone in the LGBTQ community.
Yes, yeah. I mean, you see a bunch of that too, where the barriers to service. I know that there's, I don't know, a lot of the types of shelter programs are like, hey, you have to be here, like you just said, by this time. You have dinner
Right.
at this time. We lock the doors, or there's just a first come first serve for beds too. And
Right.
also, the thing too is when you're getting into entry level employment, there's not every job is going to be one that ends by 4:30, so you can be at the, because I've known of shelters that close at 5 o'clock, 5 or 6 p.m. Right. No, I'm certain they don't all do that, but I'm just saying,
Right.
yeah. And there's always been, for someone who works in addiction a lot, there's always been, a lot of places also have a zero tolerance for not just behavioral problems, but if, you come in and you're intoxicated at all, you may never be allowed to come back. And
Right.
I'm sure there's those out there. We have a lot of like advocacy professionals who listen to the show. And when I say that, I'm not necessarily proposing a solution. When I say that, it's not like, yeah, let everybody come in no matter what they're doing. I know that that's a competing need to run a program, but
Right.
sometimes there are things that become barriers to people. That's all, even if we don't want them to be, I guess. Trying to say that in a nice way to those that are trying to run those programs, but it's always been frustrating to someone who works with trauma and addiction to be like, oh, if you have a relapse at all, or let's not even call it a relapse, you haven't recovered at all yet, and we're going to say, oh, you had yeah, okay, well, we never want to see you again. It's pretty hard.
Yeah. Yeah. On the flip side, I mean, I do understand these shelters or institutions, they do need to think about everyone's safety and triggering other people as well who may
Yes,
be in a
yeah.
different place in the recovery. At the same time, I do know there's a few shelters that do a strike system that gives a little more grace for those that are trying to recover from addiction or that might sometimes break the rules here and there by not being able to get there on time or like that.
Yes, no, and that's the thing. I think one of the great trends, because you're absolutely right. These are socially conscious individuals who are trying to run these places. They're not in the business of trying to turn people away, but
Right, right.
there is all those safety requirements, and I think nowadays with education and awareness, well, I mean, you have organizations like yours that are there to try to address that some of those things, and you have addiction awareness that leads to strike programs or different ways, or just basically there's different focus, and we talk and share things more as agencies, right? At least
Right.
when it's working well.
Right. Idealistically, yes.
Yes. What do you mind if I ask, like, what are some of the bigger obstacles to running an organization like yours?
I would say, especially mine, that this is our second year of official operations, so we're still pretty young. It would be probably visibility. People know that we exist, that we are a resource, so that people we can have survivors come in, we can serve the population that we are hoping to aid, as well as figuring out how to build these partnerships with more established organizations, with these shelters, getting those conversations so that we can refer our survivors there, and we can have a conversation before we do a referral so that we can, in a way, ease the transition for our survivors. This is what the situation is. This is what the requirements are. We already had a conversation, and we will be happy to jump in on that meeting for when you meet their case manager or you meet their housing manager.
Wow. A lot of moving parts there.
Yeah, yeah.
How many people do you usually have on your team? You guys have to operate with. I'm sure it's probably. I'm not sure that you've ever hit a point. I've never met an organization that said, "Oh, we got plenty. We don't want any more help."
No, no, no. Especially not a nonprofit.
Right.
So we have. I think I will be the seventh Sunday in leadership, and then we are run mostly those that do not have direct access to survivors, but volunteers. Those are helping us with our awareness, helping us build our database with places that they can go to, legal aid, housing, support groups, so that we're not reinventing the wheel every time we meet a survivor. We have a database to pull from. So we do have a large team of volunteers and a small team of leadership, because again, we are a nonprofit. We can always use more people. But yeah, it does take a lot of people. It does take a village to help out. Mhm.
Wow. What are some of the best ways people can help out?
So would be spreading awareness, having the conversation. It can be a taboo subject, but as we see, it's in the news. It's becoming, bringing up more to light. And then would be to, of course, volunteer your time. It could be something as being a social media volunteer setting, spreading awareness that way, helping a nonprofit that way, especially if you're in high school or in grad school, you want to help out that way. It could be helping out with outreach, a fundraising event, or sometimes we do need physical materials, hygiene products, clothing, things like that for our survivors, and donating that.
Yeah. Do you do? I know some shelters will do this where they list some of those needs on their website, or they link up to an Amazon list or something. Is there a way people can tell what kind of materials you do need? Or do they just reach out and contact you, or is there kind of a list or something?
Yeah, normally they reach out and contact us. We try not to, I guess, try to have the things that we need for our survivors and not have this excessive, backlog. We are small. Not, we don't have storage units everywhere.
Sure. Yeah.
But
That makes sense.
yeah, yeah. Sometimes of the year, especially around Christmas, there are greater needs than maybe in the summer. We want to make sure that they get those products. But yes, they can definitely contact us on our website, and say, hey, we have blankets for the winter. Do you have a need for those? And we'll accept them if we have survivors willing to have
Gotcha.
those.
Well, then I guess you're also networking with places that do that as well, aren't you? I mean, getting them to find supplies, as well as it sounds like you then supply as well when you can.
Right. Yeah, we address the gaps in that. So sometimes it's first come, first serve at those places. So if they're like, oh, I've been trying to get a new pair of shoes or even underwear, we're like, okay, we can reach out to our community and see if anyone's willing to donate that.
Right. Huh.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the social media thing, this is one of those where we hear so much about social media and being cautious and like, we all love our doom scrolling or just our, watching reels or whatever it is. But this is a good, healthy use of it. I always say if all you can do, time, money being short, you're already using your phone. And even if you donated just 10% of the time that you spend on your phone anyway to forwarding social media postings or saying, hey, everybody, here's a cool place that I heard about on maybe, one of my favorite podcasts or something. I don't want to tell everybody how to rate these things, but,
Right.
but whatever it is, to share that. And that doesn't cost anything. And it's time we're already spending, right? Yeah.
Right. And you never know who might need that or who might know someone who might need that information. That might be, there's a shame aspect or embarrassed to talk about it. So just forwarding on social media gives everyone the agency to click on it, find out what this organization is about on their own.
I was real curious about how has it felt for you, just from a personal or emotional perspective, to make that switch when you said, I want to switch from the legal, like law, the law side of it to more the social interaction, social work. How has that been for you? Has that been satisfying?
Oh, immensely satisfying. I feel like I can see the impact much greater, especially working directly with survivors. Um, so I like seeing the process and the journey. Sometimes success isn't always what people might think. It might not be someone getting an apartment in a house. It might just be someone building their confidence up again to even apply for jobs. It could be something smaller, and you can see all the things that go into it that do sometimes even pack the legal side of, following through on the prosecution. You need the survivor to go to court dates, but there's that mental aspect, having a housing shelter, having the clothes to go to court. So, yeah, it's been much more rewarding for me personally to work more hands-on.
Mm-hmm. Is that what made the switch? Is the desire to be more hands on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm always fascinated by the way people find an outlet for their passion with things where you're looking for needs and finding the things that kind of sort of coincide, between here's what I'd like to be doing and here's the need that actually correlates with that. I don't know. I just always think that's especially in human services, because it's easy for us to say, here's what I think I should do. Here's where I'm at and what people say. And then how do I put myself, my own personality into it? I'm always fascinated by that, how people make that decision. Yeah. Well, I want to give a chance for people to know where your organization is and where we find it online and social media and such. Before we give that out, I always like to ask people for just a bit of a personal recommendation for people of a thing that you like to do to give back to the community, other than your entire career in life, by the way. This is always the issue when I talk to people with nonprofits, but we're going to plug yours. Obviously, everyone needs to know about it. But are there things that you find that you'd recommend people do as they go around their lives?
Sure. There's different things people can do that are not that won't interfere with their lives too much. You can give blood at your local shelter, of course, or agency or hospital. You can do walks and runs for awareness. I know there's the MS walk, or there's many near Philadelphia Art Museum, to learn about other issues and spread awareness that way. And of course, support these causes. You can also donate if you have anything extra, even like Christmas presents that you don't, you're like, I want to regift. You can definitely donate those to shelters, because sometimes these individuals do not get Christmas presents and they don't have a brand new sweater.
Yeah, sort of
So
like it might feel like a non-essential. Well, and when you're running the budget for a nonprofit, it is a non-essential as far as this,
right.
right? But it's something that makes a big difference. Those are great. Those are great guidelines. Where do people find Because organization?
So they can find us at becauseorganization.org. That's our website, and they can contact us through there. As well as we have course, we have a phone number they can call us as well, which is 610-545-3337. And through there, they can contact us through if they're a survivor and they would like services, or they're a case manager and would like some more guidance on how to help their client specifically. And of course, if you are someone that would like to donate or even their time for volunteering, or of course to our cause, they can go on our website there.
Wonderful. And like I said, it's great. It's always great to do things that we think help. It's even better to do things that actually help. And this is very much, and I feel very passionately about it. This is probably the third or fourth time I mentioned it. This is very much an issue where there's lots of people out there who say, this is how you do it. And you guys are actually some of the ones that are doing this is actually making the difference that we would like to make. So that's something, especially in the area of trafficking, that I would really recommend people do, is look for that. People that are actually doing what does work instead of just what we think will work. So
thank you. I appreciate that.
A quick plug to everybody out there for our charity of focus. Every month, of course, we pick a charity of focus. And this month it is Mental Health Awareness Creative Arts Gallery. Everybody who had heard Brian Belt on the program, this is an organization that provides free art training as well as providing art, a way to showcase art for those that are working with mental health disorders and particularly addiction-related problems. And so you can go to stigmafree.art to learn more about the things that they're doing with local art shows, and also with they work with Drug Court and some other programs there in Hudson, New York as well. So everybody know about that. As always, if you do, please go there and deal directly with the charity. If you are a person who would like to support the Broken Brain and you ship us a couple bucks here or there, you get the bonus materials that we have. But 50% of any Patreon donations go to the charity of focus within the month that you signed up. If that's I'm trying to find a less confusing way to say that, but basically in whatever month you donate, then 50% will go. As long as you stay as a member, then we'll always give that out as well. I wanted to give, I had been weighing out certain charities to switch our focus to in November, and I'd really like to use Because Organization as our charity of focus next month, just because I like you guys a lot from what I have seen so far.
That's great.
So everybody can know that as well, that's coming up. So a little exclusive to anyone who's listening. Thank you, Marcia. Thank you again so much.
Thank you, Dwight. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Court and Parts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court and Parts shows, visit courtandarts.com.
Hey everybody, Dwight here. Just wanted to let you know the Broken Brain has a new sponsor of sorts. Let me explain what that means. The Prevention Research Institute, which is the company that provides Prime for Life classes and trainings for clinicians to become instructors for Prime for Life, specifically. If you're not familiar, Prime for Life is oftentimes considered to be an introductory intervention for people who have had some troubles with addictions, particularly with DUIs or some legal issues that you get into with there. So I have been talking to them, trying to learn a little bit more about their program, as I work with a lot of people who have court involvement having to do with substance abuse. And we've worked out a little thing where I am going to actually train with them to become an instructor, and I'm going to share with you more about that process as it goes forward. So, in the interest of disclosure, wanted to let you know that is a value of trade that we are doing. They're not a financial sponsor of the program, but we are doing some work together in that way. So wanted you to know that that's why that you'll be hearing about that. And I'm going to update you on the training as I go forward. Should be really interesting for all of us.